Welcome once again to Cinemaholics. From the Bay Area, I am John Negroni, editor-in-chief of Cinemaholics. From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and he also reviews films for Cinemaholics.com. It's Will Ashton.
Hello.
From Kansas City, she is the film editor for The Pitch, with bylines at Slash Film, Crooked Marquee, RogerEbert.com, and your hearts. It's Abby Olchesi.
Hello.
You can find more episodes of our show, including our full archive on cinemaholics.com, including written reviews and bonus content. And of course, you can write into the show anytime by sending us an email, cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support our show, help us keep the lights on, especially as we move into 2021, which is proving to be a little bit more interesting than some of us might have imagined, then you can become one of our monthly patrons on patreon.com/cinemaholics and get all kinds of perks and stuff. You can also check out our merch page, which is one of the more fun ways to support us, because you could buy a hoodie or a shot glass, a t-shirt, and I understand possibly every single one of you listening has already done so, but don't forget, you can send merch as a gift. And finally, you can support us non-financially by just giving us a friendly rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, whichever podcast app you call home. That, of course, helps us tremendously as well, especially as we move into a new year of film. And, we're doing our top films of the year. We do this every year. We're doing some different things, of course. But, at the onset, I do want to bring up that 2020 was a very difficult year for our show, just in terms of downloads. I mean, we, like most podcasts, took a huge hit in 2020. We went from a certain average that was pretty high. I'm not going to give the full number, so that's some inside baseball. But I'd say our downloads were cut in half and then kept going down. That's how the lack of a theater going blockbuster season impacted us. It's been pretty bad, but we've been doing our best to keep the show going and to keep providing content for people who are still interested in what we have to say about all the movies that did come out this year. So just giving you all a quick overview of what we have in store. In addition to telling you our favorite films of 2020, we're also going to talk about the year in film, some of the films that we didn't get to see that are on our to-watch list, and of course, we wrap things up with some honorable mentions and our number one picks of the year. But to start things off, Abby Olchesi, let's talk about the year in film, and you get to go first. 2020, how would you characterize what the films of this year meant to you, how you watched films this year, anything you want to share?
Sure. Obviously it's been a little chaotic. This end of year season has felt a little more scattershot than usual in terms of trying to track down some of the big releases that are up for awards consideration. It feels like more in this year more than in years past. I've kind of relied on a patchwork of communications and connections between folks to actually get screeners for the movies that I want to see, which is not usually the case. But that's, again, like you mentioned before, that's kind of inside baseball. Apart from that, though, I feel like it's been a surprisingly strong year for movies. And it's been an interesting year for introspection as well, I think, in cinema. There's been a lot of diverse perspectives, I think, this year that I've appreciated encountering. A lot of movies that did really interesting artistic things with really small budgets. And a lot of really interesting movies this year coming from first-time directors or first-time feature directors that I thought were really, really strong. So I think it's been a surprising year in more ways than one, but mostly for me, a pleasantly surprising one.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. It's been a surprising year, but, for me, one of the biggest surprises, it's just how many films did get to come out. I think I was a little pessimistic at the beginning of the year, once COVID started and it became clear that a lot of things were getting delayed. I remember, because Abby, you hadn't joined the show yet, but Will and I were having conversations of what are we even going to review on the show? Because eventually they're going to run out of things to release. But it was kind of a fresh reminder that a lot of films are in the can before they hit streaming services and they hit on demand and everything. There's just lots of films that hit festivals, and one of the craziest things about the year was how some of those films were able to be elevated in a way that they wouldn't have been otherwise, because they would have been overshadowed, of course, by the latest Wonder Woman movie being in theaters and No Time to Die, the latest James Bond, and all of that. So yeah, this was a particularly favorable year toward independent films and films that like the studios were able to put more resources, time, and marketing into, because they kind of had to. And as a result, I was able to talk about films with people that like people actually knew about the films I was talking to them about. Like some of the ones in our list, they were like, oh, I've heard of that, kind of out of necessity. We'll talk a lot about, I think, some of the like streaming exclusives too, like how Netflix kind of was a bit of a dominator in terms of like guiding pop culture entertainment in 2020, in terms of like, some of the biggest pop culture moments outside of film were like Queen's Gambit, Tiger King, lately Bridgerton. I mean, there were just so many things. There were so many weeks where we spent most of our time reviewing things that were straight up Netflix, Cobra Kai, that just like dropped and everything. But what about you, Will, Ashton? You were talking to me before the show about how, this was a tough list for you. If you want to get into that before we start things off proper.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's just because of like my mental state or just the state of the films that we got, but this year was harder for me to put together a concrete top 10 list. That's not to say that there are bad films this year. Certainly there are quite a few good ones. And obviously, I mean, in addition to the films that we're going to be talking about in our respective top 10 lists, I really did enjoy a lot of the films that are in my honorable mentions. I'm looking forward to discussing those in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I guess I know for you, a lot of movies that came out this year, you were very, very high on. And that's understandable because they were like the perfect form of escapism right now. And a lot of films had like some extra meanings and a little bit more layers that we could dive into because of COVID, some like unsuspected ties to reality that came from there. But yeah, I mean, I did enjoy quite a few films that I saw this year, and certainly I'm not ashamed of my top 10. But I would be very curious to know like what in a normal timeline what my list would be like, and if a number of these films would have made the cut. But at the same time, like Abby was mentioning, and you were mentioning as well, John, that like in what other timeline would we be discussing like Bacurau for our like as our main review of an episode, or like Tiger King, exactly, or She Dies Tomorrow, or quite a few other films that like just like last year, or actually I guess I should say 2019, if we had like said, hey, like these are going to be some of our main reviews this year, it'd be like insanity, like you just wouldn't believe it. But that is 2020 in a nutshell. And I do hope that they drive the profile of those films, like they help some people see some of these smaller titles that got released and got a little bit more notice because of that. But like you said, it's been a hard time for our show to establish itself in a year without cinema in a traditional sense, like a theater, which I was talking about that with a friend of mine yesterday. I do think not having a movie theater, it's definitely been hard for me, like in terms of my mental health. Like there's always just been something about going to the movies and looking forward to that experience and just shutting off the world and just watching a movie on the big screen for 2 hours, maybe more. And I do think that's been beneficial for me in previous years. And to not have that for most of 2020 was definitely tough. But I do think because I was trapped at home and not really able to go out and do much, I was able to catch up on a lot of older films, like films from not in 2020. And I definitely think that's been beneficial. And I also got a chance to rewatch a lot of films, particularly through our spinoff show, Extra Milestone. I know that definitely has been beneficial for me catching up on a lot of films I haven't seen. So in terms of cinema, 2020 was definitely a mixed bag, to say the least.
Yeah, this year was definitely a year where we had to create new rituals for ourselves, I think, in terms of how we watch films. Because, yeah, for me, like, I definitely went from going to the theater a couple times a week, if not several times a week, and having those opportunities to kind of travel a little bit and go to other parts around Northern California, because we have a lot of movie theaters here, and I'd be able to like go to different ones to watch different things, and it would be like my whole day, and there would be like this whole excitement around going in to watch the latest film that just premiered at a festival. But this year has been like very trying in terms of like there are a lot of times when, because we're home so much, I'd rather not like sit and watch a bunch of films. I'd rather like go for a walk and, not really deal with that. I don't want to sell our listeners short, by the way, because even though we've had fewer downloads, our listeners have been, just as passionate and engaged as ever. Our voicemail segments have brought in a ton of new listeners who are, writing into us and like sending us as well. You'll hear in this episode, you'll hear people who sent their voicemails for their favorite films of the year. Thank you everybody who did that. And so we were able to pick out a bunch, and you'll be hearing them throughout this episode. And I think they're indicative of like, the fans that we've brought on in a very strange year who have come to us to discover some of these titles. And so there's plenty of silver linings in 2020. And as we move into this year, I'm feeling optimistic. Although I have to say, I'm curious for you two. I was looking at my list from last year, my top 10, and I have to say, like, there are films on my top 10 this year that are really, really good. And, it's a very high quality list. But I have to say, like, last year's top 10, I think is like on the whole, more of those films I like better than more of these films. So
I would agree.
Was that the case for either of you?
Mm-hmm. Definitely for me.
Yeah. I think a little bit maybe. And I also feel like 2019 was just like a really strong year for movies that I felt very strongly about and had really strong emotional reactions to. There are a lot of movies on my list that I do feel that way about. Maybe not quite on the same level as something like, say, Parasite or Knives Out, but like, I feel pretty strongly about my top list, and I am extremely curious to see what the next year brings, because at least based on what I'm starting to see so far, it looks like there might be some pretty interesting contenders.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I could count it right now. I have just 3 films on my top 10 that I saw in a movie theater. I'll be able to say which ones those are. A lot of my honorable mentions were theater. And the reason they're theater films is because of Sundance, thankfully, I was able to see them. But for a lot of people, that unfortunately that wasn't the case. So as we move into our films that we want to watch list, let's first say, how many films were you able to watch? I'm kind of springing this on you because I forgot to ask you all to prepare that, because I keep track, and I saw, let's see, 165 films in 2020 that were 2020 films. So not all films, like old films included, but that's slightly higher than last year, which I'm a little embarrassed. I could have watched way more, but what ended up happening is, usually in December, I watch way more, like I cram way more films in, and I was on track to watch at least 15 more this month, but just wasn't able to do that this year. I wasn't able to cram because I had other responsibilities to take care of. But Will, what about you? Do you know how many films you saw this year that are new 2020 films?
So I don't exactly know the number of 2020 films I saw exactly, but I know that for 2020, I had 358 first watches. So that's for any year, including 2020, which is easily the highest it's been, I think, in like a decade. Like normally I get, like, I'd say on average, like maybe like, I don't know, like 270 or something like that in a given year. And like, like at least half of those would be the year like of that year. So I would say, I guess of that number, it's probably about just a rough estimate, maybe like 250. I want to guess is terms how many 2020 films I saw, and that's not counting the films I just watched like this past week or earlier in 2021. But yeah, that'd be my rough estimate, but I can't say with any certainty at this point.
All right. And what about you, Abby? Do you have an idea, like a rough idea, how many you were able to see this year?
In terms of number, I don't even I don't even think I have a rough estimate.
We gotta get you
feel
on
like
Letterboxd.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I am on Letterboxd. I don't use it that often. I should use it more. I am.
I don't know if I follow you.
Yeah. I just I'm not on it all of the time. But yeah, I try not to keep like a regular journal of stuff, although I am curious about like how many movies I've watched. There is part of me that feels like if I were to actually quantify it, I would just be depressed by how many hours I could have been spending like outdoors. But yeah, and that's not a knock on anybody. That's totally a personal thing. But I feel like I have been able to keep up with most of the significant releases this year, which is pretty good. It's been a little more of a crush toward the end of the year this year, more than previous years. I think probably because I wasn't going to any festivals this year, apart from like True False in March, and that probably took a pretty significant hit on being able to space it out over time. But yeah, I feel like I probably averaged like about a movie a day, I think, this year. But a lot of those were like viewing stuff that I'd already seen or like stuff that came out prior to 2020. I'd say maybe about half of those were new releases.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah, because for me, it was only like a movie every 2 or 3 days, which is usually where I'm at. So that wasn't like a big change for me this year. But all right, let's talk about the films that are on our to watch list. These are the films that we wanted to see in 2020 or up until this episode, but we just didn't get a chance. Most of these films we weren't able to see because they weren't available yet. A lot of them are going to be hitting on demand actually this month, and we'll be able to see them. Some of them won't come out for a couple more months, if not longer. And then there's some on this list that we just didn't get to because we watched other stuff instead, but we still are curious about them for sure. I'll go through my picks real fast. My number one right now, and my most anticipated that I haven't seen yet, is One Night in Miami, the new film by Kim Powers. Also, The Father, which stars Olivia Colman and Anthony Hopkins. Still really want to see The Climb, which I've heard tremendous things about. This one's a little bit funnier. Bad Boys for Life. I never saw Bad Boys for Life. I feel like I have to watch the other two films to get to it, but I'll see that one eventually, I think. And I wanted to mention it because it's like the big box office movie of the year. I think it's like one of the highest grossing. Vitalina Varela, which has been on my list for a while. The Gentleman, the Guy Ritchie film, I missed because of Sundance. 40-Year-Old Version, which I almost saw the other day. I was about to start it. It's on Netflix, but I just narrowly missed it. But I am going to see that soon. Beanpole, which I ended up watching Baby Teeth instead of Beanpole, and I'm regretting it because I didn't like Baby Teeth very much. So I wish I had seen Beanpole instead. La Llorona, which is a horror film that is, I don't know why, it's on my Shudder. I keep seeing it and I just keep missing it. And then finally, this one really stings. Promising Young Woman. I just never got to see it, and it's just about to come out. I really, really wanted to see it just based on what I've heard about that one. Big Carey Mulligan fan over here, but yeah. So those are my films to watch. We'll move on to you, Will. What do you got in the can here?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this to you already, but I think I had a hard time narrowing down this list in my top 10, just because there are quite a few films I haven't had a chance to see, and I've seen on other lists that unfortunately I didn't get an opportunity to watch. But number one for me is Minari. John set up the false hope that I might have a chance to see that this weekend, but alas, that didn't.
Don't blame me. Blame the publicist.
I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just blaming my cruel fate, I guess, because I didn't get a chance to see it. So I don't have an opinion on the film, and I can't say if it's one of the best of the year. Same goes for Sorry We Missed You, as well as The Painted Bird and Tommaso. I hope I'm correct. I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
Lingua Franca. That's another one I really wanted to see, and unfortunately I didn't get a chance to. Same goes for 14. I almost watched that last night. I ended up watching another film in my honorable mentions instead. But I've been hearing great things about that, so I really want to check that out. Vitalia Varela? Is that how, I know you just
Vitalina Varela.
Okay, yeah. That's been on so many top 10 lists, and I just didn't get a chance to watch it. It just never really wasn't. I was never really in the mood for that one, but I've heard it's great. Likewise, First Cow. I'm actually 80 minutes into First Cow. I was watching that before we recorded. I just didn't get a chance to finish it. I was telling John that probably, based on where I stand on the film right now, that'd probably be in my top 10 if I finished it. But alas, I haven't seen the last 40 minutes. I don't know what's in store for me.
I'll say real quick, because I have a feeling, because I think the last 40 minutes are fantastic. So we could maybe, honestly, I have a feeling it would be in your top 10 based on what you've said about the other films on your top 10.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty jarring, though, because First Cow has been on so many top 10 lists. But yeah, none of us have it on our top 10s. I'll give that away, which is interesting. I wasn't expecting that.
I don't know. I'm loving it so far. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I have fond feelings for First Cow. I have fond feelings, especially for the soundtrack, which I have listened to about 3 or 4 times. Like I bought it on vinyl, and it's become like a comfort listen for me in the last couple of months. I think soundtrack. It just kind of, it's great. I think it just kind of narrowly squeaked out of my my top films list.
All right. And then you had 2 more, Will?
So at number 9 I have Beanpole, which you've mentioned before, but that's been playing at one of my favorite virtual cinemas. Unfortunately I didn't get a chance to check it out either. I've heard really good things about it. And then Emma, which is not to be confused with another film named Emma with Anya Taylor-Joy. That was EMMA period. This is EMA, which is I forget the guy who did Jackie. I forget the director's name off the top of my head.
I forget too. Yeah.
Yeah, Pablo Larraín.
There you go. Thank you.
There you go.
This is his newest film. It's on Mubi right now. For like, I think a day it was available for free, but I didn't know that until the day after. So I didn't get a chance to check that out. And I don't have Mubi, so I unfortunately missed this one. But this is one I was told is like really good, and it's falling under the radar because I think a lot of people don't have Mubi either. But yeah, those are my to watch films that unfortunately I didn't get a chance to check out.
All right, and then we'll finish out, Abby, your 10 to watch.
Yeah, my number one still to watch is the same as yours, John. One Night in Miami, followed by Anything for Jackson, which I know you have seen and liked a lot. And I feel weird because I kind of wanted you to watch that. I wanted us all to watch that.
Yeah.
And of course, I still haven't seen it.
I only saw it because you recommended it, and I was like, it must be great. And then you're like, well, I haven't seen it. But
yeah. I really wanted to watch it, and I didn't get to it that particular weekend. And then shortly after that, like the end of year crush of stuff happened, and I still haven't gotten to it. But hopefully, I will get to see it sometime in the next week or so. I also have Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, the Eliza Hittman movie on there. Just because I've heard really good things about it. And again, it's just one of those that kept getting pushed back and I still haven't gotten to it. La Llorona is also on my list. So I've got some Shudder catching up to do. Also, Beanpole is another one that's on there.
I think that's the only one all three of us have is Beanpole.
I know. Yeah. And I've heard really good things about it. I remember watching the trailer for it when it first, I think, hit online screening rooms, and I thought it looked really strong. I just haven't gotten to it yet. The Painter and the Thief is a documentary that I've heard really good things about, and I feel like I maybe saw it on one of your lists, but I might be wrong about that. And I am curious to check that out too, being a documentary fan as I am. She Dies Tomorrow is another one that I really wanted to check out but didn't get to, and I think that also I know I've seen on your other lists. So I know we'll talk about that more soon to come. I also have The Climb on mine, which is, I've heard good things about it and just haven't gotten to it. My number 9 is another horror movie called Amulet, which is the directorial debut of Romola Garai, who is an actress that I've enjoyed for a number of years. And I just thought it was super interesting that her first movie is a gothic horror film, which is not something that I would have expected from her based on her acting output. So I am super curious to check that out. I've been hearing pretty good things about it. And my number 10 is Martin Eden, the Italian film starring Luca Marinelli of The Old Guard. And that was something that I think first popped up at Toronto in 2019, I want to say, is when it started making festival rounds. And I remember it didn't make a huge hit at the time. There were one or two people that did see it and had positive things to say about it. I feel like it's benefited a lot from The Old Guard having come out this year, just because people really hopped on the Luca Marinelli train. And it's I've seen kind of varied reactions to it, but more positive than ambivalent enough to where I am curious to check it out.
Yeah, I'll just say right now it's in my honorable mentions. So, and it was definitely very high, and it was a contender for my top 10, but didn't quite make it. We'll talk more about our honorable mentions, of course, later in the show before we get to our number 1 picks. But with that, I think it's time to get into our top 10 movies of 2020. Now, here's how it works. The way we're going to do this is we're each going to do our number 10 pick, our number 9 pick, number 8 pick. But if a film is shared between our lists, we're not going to talk about it until we get to the person who has it higher. That said, there is no film on here that all three of us have. So our lists are pretty different. That said, all three of our number 10 picks are on higher on somebody else's list. We actually can't talk about our number 10 film quite yet because they're going to come up later. And with our number 9 pick, I can't talk about mine yet because that's higher on somebody else's list. So we're going to start with Will Ashton's number 9 pick. Will, what is your number 9 film of 2020?
Yeah, so for me, my number 9 pick is David Byrne's American Utopia, which is one of two films that Spike Lee made this year. Obviously, the other one being The Five Bloods, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, this is a filmed version of the concert of the same name that David Byrne put on, I think, the past 2 years. I did get a chance to see the live version in 2019, if I'm remembering correctly. And easily, I've mentioned this before in our review, but one of my favorite concert going experiences of all time, unquestionably, it's just an amazing experience to see David Byrne live, and he is one of our most proficient musicians for a reason. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to top Stop Making Sense, which is the previous Talking Heads live concert film, because I consider that the best live concert film ever made, but at least as far as I've seen. But this film, yeah, I think this is just one of those films where not only do I think it's really good at what it's doing, it's a good chance to see Spike Lee just in his element, bringing so many great creative flourishes to a concert film while also showcasing David Byrne's talents. But this is just one of those where I scratched that itch because I just didn't get a chance to see much of any live theater. I usually don't, but especially in 2020, it's definitely a sad year for the arts, because we haven't had so many great concerts. I'm sure there's virtual stuff and, you know, all those different things are available as well as concerts. And yeah, that's fine for now. But this was just so full of life and vibrancy. And I know this one didn't quite hit you two as hard as it hit me, but that's fine. I'm a big David Byrne fan. And
I remember Abby liked it quite a bit.
Oh, am I misspeaking?
No, yeah, I liked it. I liked it all right. I think, Will, that you, out of the three of us, that you were the one that had the strongest reaction to it, though.
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, I kind of figured that going in, which is fine. Yeah, this is just one of those films where I just think it really hit that itch for me in 2020. It gave me that optimism and enthusiasm and creative flourishes that I was really looking for, especially at this time. And yeah, I had a ball with this. So that's David Byrne's American Utopia.
Speaking of musical stuff, yeah, this is the only concert film on our list. None of us have anything that's like a stage play. So none of us have Hamilton, which I've seen on a lot of top 10 lists. So kind of calling that out. A lot of people really loved Hamilton. We liked Hamilton. I remember we had favorable things to say about it earlier in the year. But yeah, it's I don't think it's on any of our like honorable mentions or anything like that. I mean, correct me if we get to it later. But yeah, American Utopia, that's like the big music one, I suppose. We're going to play a voicemail here from a listener who wanted to share their number one film. And they actually shared two films with us. Here is what Tim had to say about his favorite films of 2020.
There were two films in 2020 that made me deliriously happy. The first was Spike Lee's David Byrne's American Utopia. So it's up for argument over who's the genius there, David Byrne or Spike Lee, but it's an amazing concert film. The second, I loved Autumn de Wilde's Emma. I thought she brought Jane Austen's story to life in a delightful way, meticulous production design, costumes, and score, and just a pacing that made it so much more fun than typical Jane Austen adaptations.
All right, Abby Olcese, what is your number 9 film of 2020?
So we mentioned earlier that this has been kind of a strong year for independent films, for smaller budget films, and for kind of director debuts, just because of the way that things shook out this year. And one of the movies that I think benefited really well from this is my number 9 pick, which is The Mortuary Collection, directed by Ryan Spindell and starring the one and the only Clancy Brown. It's a really great throwback to kind of the anthology horror movies like Creepshow and Black Sabbath and like Crypt Keeper type things. It's got a lot of those themes in there and that kind of aesthetic in there, as well as just a love of storytelling that I think is apparent throughout it. I also think it's a movie that does a really impressive amount with a really tight budget. And I got to speak with Ryan Spindell and Clancy Brown about the making of that movie for the pitch earlier this year. And it was just really fascinating to hear them both talk about like the commitment to craft and kind of what that looks like when you have to move money around in such a way that it benefits a really specific set of the creative process so that it really sings as much as it does. So yeah, I think it's a movie with a lot of heart. It's a movie with clearly a really strong artistic effort put behind it. And it for me personally, just resulted in some of my favorite movie related experiences this year. So that's why it's my number 9.
All right. And I don't think, I think Mortuary Collection is one of the few films on our top 10s that 2 others have not seen. I haven't seen Mortuary Collection. I believe, Will, you have not seen it as well, correct?
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to see this one. I didn't even know about it until you had it on your list. Same goes for another film that's on your list that I won't give away, but it made me...
She talked about it on the show.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say...
You were there.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess I must have forgotten it, unfortunately. But yeah, no, when I saw these on the list, I instantly put them on my own because I was trying to catch up on them. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see these 2, but I'm excited to check them out.
Yeah, I think there are 2 other films. I could be wrong, but I think there are 2 other films in our top 10s that are total outliers in terms of like the 2 people who haven't seen them. I don't think I have any that neither of you have seen. So, you know, that just tells you like you guys were keeping up with my list, I guess. I don't know. I'm just kidding. All right. I guess I could talk about my number 8 film of 2020. The first film I get to talk about is my number 8 because my number 10 and my number 9 are shared with you 2, which is great. I'm totally happy with that. But this film was one of my favorite surprises of the year, The 20th Century from director Matthew Rankin, his full-length directorial debut. We talked about this film a couple of months ago, and this was one of my favorite comedies of the year. I'd say that like in my list of comedies that have actually made me laugh a lot in the past few years, this is on a very short list. It is a wonderful, just absurdist love letter to Canadian political history, with Dan Byrne playing the hilarious William Lyon Mackenzie King. And this is a movie that's really stuck in my brain quite a bit. It's jokes, it's set pieces, it's, you know, heart and flair and just commitment to being like full tilt, you know, insane. I could not get enough of it as I was watching it. And I have to, of course, turn it over to Abby because I believe you had this as your number 10.
I did. Yeah. I really enjoyed the 20th Century, and I keep thinking that I want to put it up higher on my list and then thinking like it's not gonna, I don't know, track for somebody on there. But like, yeah, if it was on my personal list, I would put it up just like in terms of personal favorite movie watching experiences this year, I would put it up really high. We mentioned this a little bit during our discussion of it, that like if this had come out during a certain point of my life where I was like really obsessed with Monty Python and Kids in the Hall, like I would just be amazed that this movie existed at all, and it would feel like it was made specifically for me. So yeah, watching it felt like a really fun throwback to like strange absurdist cult comedy that I have always loved and at one point in my life was just extremely obsessed with. So yeah, I love the 20th Century a lot.
Very, very well put. All right, Will, your number 8 pick, I will say it's in my honorable mentions, and it was a fierce battle for me to not have it in my top 10. I'm actually kind of annoyed with myself. I probably should have squeezed it in there, honestly. But it's your number 8, and yeah, tell us all about it.
Well, it's funny you mention that because I was kind of going back and forth on whether I should put it in my top 10, even though I really did like the movie a lot. But I was like, is this really a top 10 for me? Is it all this stuff? But for me, just to say what it is first, it's Miranda July's Kajillionaire, which is her third film, and in my opinion, her most accomplished one. And the reason I put it in my top 10, in addition to just liking the movie a whole bunch, is that I think for me, this is another film that the themes of it are obviously universal, and I think they would be resonant in any given year. But the film tackling, as a lot of her other films do, this desire for eccentric people trying to find connectivity in a world that doesn't really understand them or agree with them, while also kind of like learning to like find their own pace and like kind of make sense with your background and just trying to find your own sense of rhythm stuff. These are very familiar themes, but Miranda July brings such an originality and a uniqueness to her vision that they become new again in a way that just showcases a filmmaker who's continuing to grow and establish herself and just really stand out in a lot of exceptional ways. It's really a shame, I feel, that she only makes a film like once a decade, it seems, because she just continues to get better and more accomplished with each film. And I also think that her performances from an A-list cast that includes Evan Rachel Wood, Richard Jenkins, Genesis Rodriguez, Gina Rodriguez. Sorry. I just think they are some of my favorite performances of the year. And I know this one didn't quite sit well with some other people. I've seen some kind of divided opinion since the film has come out. I guess some people were a little too off put by its cuteness or its like kind of Sundancey qualities, which I can kind of understand. But for me, I just think her style, there is so much humanity and worth to it that I just don't think the quirks define it solely. I just think it's such a heartfelt and beautiful film in its own unique and original way that I ultimately found it to be one of the most emotionally impacting films of the year. And that's why it's my number 8 pick.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's so impacting for me as well. I've talked about it so many times in 2020, so the listeners know where I stand on it. Although I will say it's my second favorite soundtrack of 2020. My favorite soundtrack of 2020 is coming up later in the show. But all right, Abby Olcese, your number 8 film of 2020, and I think this is another outlier for me and Will. I don't think Will and I have seen this one. So what is it?
Yeah, my number 8 is Maite Alberde's documentary, The Mole Agent from Chile. And I really liked this when I saw it at the True Falls Festival back in March. And I've watched it a couple of times since then and have loved it every time. It's a very gentle and sweet documentary about a 86-year-old man who is recruited by a private detective to go undercover at an old folks home because his client wants to have somebody check in on their mother, who they think is being stolen from. And so the man that he hires, Sergio, is just this very gentle and kind man who goes undercover and finds out that there's not like really abuse going on at the San Francisco nursing home. But what he does find is a lot of just general neglect and a lot of loneliness. And so he kind of takes it upon himself to be sort of this agent of kindness that interacts with all of the different residents of the nursing home. And he quickly becomes the most popular resident because of that. So it's a very sweet and funny and kind-hearted movie that it makes you want to pay more attention to the people in your life who are older, who often go neglected. And it also is just a really nice love letter to just the power of kindness and family and kind of where our ability to be kind to others comes from. So that's why it's my number 8.
Yeah, I planned to see this one at Sundance this year, just missed it. Sad I did because I have heard good things. But yeah, that's The Mole Agent. Definitely another one I've got to add to my list because I definitely want to get to it at some point.
Yeah, same here. Actually, when I saw this on your list yesterday, shortly thereafter, I was on Letterboxd and I saw a review from another person and they were like, I think they're like Academy member or something, so they don't post often, but they're like, hey, look, I'm not really supposed to say this, but like, this is one of my favorite films in a long time. So when I saw it on your list and then that review, I was like, man, I gotta really get on this movie because I hadn't heard of it before, but yeah, I'm excited to check this one out.
All right, before we get into our number 7 picks, we have another voicemail to share from a listener who wanted to let us know their number 1 film of 2020. This is a very interesting pick. It's going to be a little bit of a hot take. I like it. This is from one of our listeners, MT. Here is what he had to say about his favorite film of 2020.
Okay, I had to really put my little thinking cap on for this one. The one movie I guess I could say that really stood out for me this year, a couple of movies for a couple reasons, but the one that stood out the most that I had more of a bias towards was Mulan. And I really liked the story. I liked how the live version was doper than the animated version. And the martial arts sequences were amazing. The cinematography, everything, the whole storyline, everything was really, really good. It was well acted. You know, it almost put me in the mind of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon with how epic that movie was. It was really, really good. So for my pick of 2020, it has to be Mulan.
All right. Thank you, MT. And I'm surprised. I did not expect anybody to pick Mulan. That definitely felt like a film that really people did not respond to on the whole. But of course, some people did. And MT is one of them. All right. Let's move on to our number 7 picks. Starting with you, Will. Your number 7 was my number 9 pick. So I'll say real fast, and I'll let you take the floor here. She Dies Tomorrow. She Dies Tomorrow is definitely a film that kind of messed with me, honestly. And I still think about it, the existential dread of it, the like the story structure, just how it like related to our kind of like contagion atmosphere, and it's not even like a literal contagion. It's such a good film, but you have it a bit higher than I do. Will, why is it your number 7?
Yeah, I mean, this is the type of film where I think in a normal year, this probably would be overlooked by me. Just because I think it's such a small kind of tightly knit little movie that it probably would have just like gone over my gaze when all these other blockbusters were coming out. But a lot of props to Neon. When this whole pandemic happened, they were really good about getting some of their smaller movies out there at drive-ins and on VOD and then on Hulu, I believe, and getting an audience for a lot of their films. And that's the reason why. We're going to have quite a few mentioned earlier or higher up on this list, and then also in our honorable mentions. But so She Dies Tomorrow is it's a new movie from Amy Seimes, who I'm more familiar with her as an actress than I am as a filmmaker. Same. Yeah, I think this is the first film of hers I've actually seen as a writer and director. But the premise of it is just a young, depressed woman comes to this sort of mortal realization. And, basically her reaction to it doesn't exactly mirror many others, but there is a contagion factor that comes into play where once she realizes that she is going to die tomorrow, that sense of morality and the loss of life becomes like literally contagious with many other people connected to her. And obviously with the pandemic and this year, there is like kind of an extra layer to that I'm sure wasn't intended, but it's the one film this year that when I think back on it, like this is like one of the most like 2020 movies of 2020, in that it does just feel like it captures that sense of melancholy and absurdism and bleakness, but also like bittersweetness of living in an unquestionable and unplaceable time that it's really hard to explain for me, like why this is such an impactful film, because it's such a small kind of niche film, like I was saying, but it just captures this very specific mood at this very specific time in my life in August that when I saw it, just like hit me like a tidal wave. And it's one that I think when I look back on 2020, it's just going to be like, yeah, that was a film for this year. So that was my number 7 pick.
Yeah. It's a hard film to sell as well to people, but I could not agree more. It really does sum up the year for me in every which way. And I want to call out Jane Addams, who one of my favorite performances of the year, and definitely a bit, undersold, I think, for some people and her career at large. And I'm glad she had this film to really have an extra role. Of course, Caitlin Schell is really great in this as well. All right, let's move on to the next film we have here, because that was Will's number 7. Abigail Chesney, what is your number 7 film of 2020?
My number 7 film is Promising Young Woman, which I know Will and I talked about on this very program not that long ago. I think it was the week before last. And yeah, I really like this movie a lot. I feel like I've mentioned before that one of the things that I really love seeing from a burgeoning director, especially somebody working in a specific genre, is like clarity of vision and somebody who really has a very specific thing that they want to say and uses storytelling to get that across. And I feel like this is an example of a movie that does do that very well. There are some elements of it that I think some people were kind of turned off by. For me, at least, I think further examination of those elements, I think, really just helps drive Emerald Fennell's point home all the more. I think it's a really dark and very stylish movie. It's also very funny. It's very bright looking, which is interesting, juxtaposed with how dark some of it gets. And I think Carey Mulligan puts in a really strong performance. There's a lot of this that I think is just really, really well thought out and really well executed.
All right, that's Promising Young Woman. And if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, like me, it's going to be available pretty soon on demand. I'm definitely going to be jumping to that as soon as I can, because I'm very anxious to see it. But let's talk about our number 6 films of the year. We're starting to get a little bit higher on this list. And here's a film that was really, really high for me most of the year. And it only just barely started to get pushed down because other things came out. But that is Palm Springs. This movie, probably my favorite theatrical experience of the year. I had the privilege of seeing this at Sundance with an audience, which I think is the ideal way to see this, because especially like I got to see this not knowing what it was about, not really knowing who was in it. But this is, of course, the latest from Lonely Island people. It's directed by Max Barbakow. It stars Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti, J.K. Simmons, Peter Gallagher. I love the cast in this, but particularly Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti in this time-bending comedy about being stuck in one place, which, again, another accidental, yes, this is a very 2020 movie. But yeah, like you were saying, Will, this is another Neon film that they were able to put on Hulu. They were able to get a lot of people to see it. And this is one of the films I was referring to in terms of like people actually heard about this and were able to discover it and enjoy it, which was really heartening considering how Popstar, Never Stop, Never Stopping, their last film, which was really good, just did not have any sort of like cultural impact. People just did not come out for it. It played in theaters, but didn't really make money. People didn't really see it. They weren't interested, I guess. But with Palm Springs...
Grimsby Bear 2, which was my number one pick, and I know that was on your top 10 as well that they produced.
Absolutely. But fortunately, a lot of people were able to discover this. I was able to recommend this to a lot of people, and because they were kind of stuck at home, they gave it a shot. And I'm really glad a lot of people did. It's, I think, one of the only sci-fi comedies we have on our list, and it's one of the only romantic comedies any of us have on our list. But I think that it is well earned. It's one of my favorite comedies and / romantic comedies in the last few years, and it's one of the films I've seen the most in the past year. I've seen it 3 or 4 times at this point. And I could speak praises of it all day, but of course, listeners know they've heard me wax on, wax off about this film plenty already. So that is Palm Springs, and I've seen it on a bunch of other top 10, top 15 lists, but it didn't quite make it for Abby and Will. But I just assume it's because they knew that I was going to talk about it so much they didn't need to mention it. So that's my theory anyway.
Yeah. Palm Springs is actually it's in my honorable mentions, which we will get to later.
Yeah, this is one of the ones I caught up on. I didn't quite share your affections for it, but I did like it. It's a little bit better than I think I anticipated. I think I was afraid this was going to be oversold to me, and I don't think that was exactly the case, but I can see why it had such an impact on you, and I wish I shared that enthusiasm for it.
Yeah, Will literally messaged me and was like, yeah, I'm like a B- on Palm Springs, and I was like, yeah, of course you are.
I think I was trying to hurt me. I said I was between a B and a B-. I don't think I actually.
I know, but I'm being
I don't
dramatic,
know if I ever settled on my grade on it, but yeah, it's not one that it's not an honorable mention for me, but I did like it. I had fun with it.
I will say that it kind of resulted in one of my several of my favorite comedy moments of the year that I think are real standouts, and the soundtrack is just a real banger. It was one of those experiences where I felt like the music supervisor had looked into my soul and decided to make a soundtrack comprised entirely of what was on my shelf in my record collection. So there was a lot that I liked about Palm Springs.
All right, Will, your number 6 pick, it is one of the few films on here that Abby and I have not seen, and I'm super jealous you were able to get this one in at the last minute. But what is your number 6?
Yeah, so this is the second most recent film that I added to my list during my crunch period, and that would be the dark dramedy The Climb, which is starring, co-written, produced by Michelangelo Covino. It's also co-written by his fellow co-star Kyle Marvin, and basically the premise of the film, it's separated into I think 6 or 7 segments, and it's basically watching the rise and fall of this very toxic bromance between these 2 lifelong friends. One is just a very earnest, good-natured guy who's just trying to get his life straightforward and, do the right thing, start a family, have a wife. And the other guy is just pretty much dead set to ruin his life for no particular reason. And it's one of these comedies where I think the flashiness of it is going to get the most notice because almost the entire film is composed of single shots. Each segment is pretty much 1 or 2 shots that are extended between 4 to 15 minutes in length. Which I thought was going to annoy me, or I thought was going to kind of give it a style over substance feel. And I think that might be the case for some, but for me, that just added to the whole extended weirdness of it. The long flowing camera movements and the extended length of each shot added to the heightened absurdity of it in a way that I found really effective and ultimately really funny. But for me, I just think this is some of the most impressive filmmaking I've seen this year. I'm really bummed that this one didn't get its full theatrical roll. I believe it came out in November in a very limited theatrical release. But pretty much this is one that a very select audience, especially very select in the US, have seen. And I'm really looking forward to more people checking it out because it has some of the biggest laughs and some of the most inspired gags I've seen this year, as well as just some of the best cinematography I've seen in a long time. So it's basically, if you want a like kind of cutesy way to sell it, it's pretty much like the art house version of Step Brothers. That's the way other reviewers have been describing it. But for me, it's just a very beautifully weird film about friendship and relationships and just time and just trying to figure out what's best for you and the people you want in your lives. And yeah, it really did the trick for me. And it was one of the most rewarding watches I had in the week, filled with a lot of good films. So I'm really looking forward to you two checking it out. I'm sure you'll give it a B minus, John, but what can I say? It is what it is.
Even though I'm the one who's been telling you about it. Okay, all right.
I was aware of it before. We almost played it at the theater where I work, but unfortunately, when COVID happened, that obviously didn't happen. But yeah, I didn't know it was as good as it was going to be when I went into it, or until you suggested as much. And yeah, I'm really excited to have you see it finally. But alas, it's just me right now, so that's a climb.
Yeah, I've heard nothing but good things about it. I've seen it on a bunch of top 10 lists, and so I'm anxious to see it. I can't wait. All right, Abby, your number 6 film is one I haven't seen, but I think, Will, you did get a chance to see it. What is your number 6?
Yeah, it's interesting that we're talking about male friendship because my number 6 is Another Round, which I know Will kind of has discussed on this program, and I have too recently. Yeah, I really enjoyed this movie's portrayal of kind of middle-aged male friendship and how it kind of gives us, or how it gives the people who are in that relationship a way of supporting each other through kind of the ennui that can kind of onset as you get older and realize that some of your dreams are kind of starting to slide away. I think you could argue that it's a pretty strong argument for day drinking. I wouldn't say that that's the case necessarily. I think the arc of its characters has more to do with the strength of their relationship and their desire to kind of keep each other accountable and help each other attain satisfaction and happiness in their lives. And it's also it's a great performance from Mads Mikkelsen, one of the best of the year. Just really energetic and committed and kind of all over the place. I say energetic, but in terms of like just a real spectrum of energy, going from really unengaged, intentionally so, as his character is unengaged, to just like hyper engaged and really involved. And it's really interesting to watch his performance as that character kind of making that transition.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing Another Round for myself. But yeah, just I missed the cutoff for me to see it. But okay, now we are moving into our top 5 films of the year, starting with my number 5, which is Will's number 10. So I'll let you start things off. Will Ashton, your number 10 film, which is my number 5.
Yeah, so this is the most recent film that I added to the list. I just barely got it in because I finished it this morning, but it is Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, which is the new film from, you might have to correct me, is her name Eliza
Hittman?
Hittman, that's it. I know she previously made Beach Rats, which was a film I loved as well. But yeah, this is one of these films where I feel like in another time, like this is the type of film I would have seen like when I was like 17. I would have gone to like the kind of more ritzy art, like AMC theater that plays like kind of smaller indie films. I would go by myself. I would just get immersed in this very sweet, gentle little character driven film for about 2 hours with trailers, and I would just fall in love with it, and I'd tell like all my friends about it, and no one would hear about it. And then I would just be, you know, I just have to live with the moment of being one of the few people who saw it. But thankfully this year, quite a few people got a chance to check it out, particularly because now it's on HBO Max. But yeah, I mean, I'll let you kind of talk about it a little bit more eloquently because I just saw it recently. But this is just the movie that hit the spot for me really well. It's very similar to I'm Pregnant, which came out and also is on HBO Max.
It's like the serious version of Unpregnant. If Unpregnant was not a comedy. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think this movie blows Unpregnant out of the water. Similar to St. Francis, which I did like. I caught that one recent as well, and I think that's another good film about a similar topic. But yeah, this is just one of those films where everything about it, I think, is just working on all cylinders. Like, it's super well directed. The performances are really honest and emotionally heartfelt. Cinematography shot on, I believe, 16 millimeter film. It just looks fantastic. And it's one film that's like, it's just so simple that I think some people might go into this and just be like, oh, is that it? But I think that's what really worked for me, is that it's just so simple and honest and humane in such a way that felt so vibrant and real. And it just gave me a perspective. Like, I'll never be a teenage girl living in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, but this movie gave me that experience, and it helped me realize what it'd be like in that situation. And it just added to what I feel is some of the most important aspects of film, which is adding to empathy and allowing people to see a perspective that they may not see otherwise. So yeah, this was very much one of my favorite films of the year.
Yeah, I don't think a single note in this film rings false. I'm very, very excited that, Abby, you get to see it for the first time, hopefully soon, because I hope you get a lot out of it the same way we did. And I know for me, I really want to elevate these performances here. Sydney Flanagan, who is just like a revelation. I know Eliza Hittman like handpicked her and was literally waiting for her to be old enough to do this role. And after you see the movie, you can absolutely see why she was so like, why she was the preferred person here. Also, Talia Ryder, who I think has huge things ahead of her. She is like the secret weapon of this film. And, in addition to like its subject matter, it really is a film about female friendships and the nuances of it, and how sometimes films can, overemphasize like certain aspects of female friendship in order to make it more entertaining or more cinematic. But like Will said, there's something just humane and real about this relationship. It's not like a lot of the ones you have seen on screen. A film that I don't think any of us have mentioned or have on our list or anything. It might be in some of these honorable mentions, but it's kind of like a cousin of this film, I would say, is The Assistant, which the Julia Gardner film, which is another kind of film that like really dramatizes and like thrillerizes a very complicated subject that is very real for a lot of women right now. And even though The Assistant didn't quite hit me in the same way Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always did, I would say that this film is emblematic of a year of film that really like, especially for female filmmakers, brought a lot of like women's issues to the forefront in a way that is just high level filmmaking, to the point where people can really watch it, feel the emotional punches, and walk away from it exactly like you said, just empathizing and being transported into another experience through the magic of cinema. So yeah, Never, Rarely is for me the peak of that in 2020. And I'm so excited for all of the careers of the people involved. And yeah, if you haven't seen it yet, I know we reviewed the film earlier this year, and I'm definitely excited to hear what some other people have to say once they get to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to checking it out myself. I've heard, nothing but good things about it.
All right, so Abby and Will, you have the same number 5, and your number 5 is my number 10. So we're probably going to talk about this one for a few minutes, huh? But we do have a voicemail, because not only do we all have it on our list, I think this is maybe the only film all three of us have, if I'm not mistaken. We actually had a listener who also has it as their number 1 film. So let's play that now.
My favorite movie, surprisingly, actually for me, was Nomadland, because I thought it was one of the most immersive films I've seen in a long time. They really drop you into a world, and Frances McDormand is brilliant, and a lot of the actors were not actors. Excuse the car that just drove in front of my house. And I loved it because it was of our times, it really pulled out these human stories of people's craving for freedom, but also for connection. And there's a sadness to the tone, obviously, but it's such a beautiful film. So Nomadland, starring Frances McDormand.
The thing I appreciate the most about that voicemail is I felt like I was in Nomadland with like the cars and like all of that. So I thought that was pretty fun. But yes, thank you, DB, for sending us that voicemail. And like I said before, this is definitely a film that all three of us certainly got a lot out of. It was my number 10. It's the latest film written and directed by Chloe Zhao. She also edited it. and it's the latest Frances McDormand film. And I'll say at the outset, I think this is the frontrunner for Best Picture. I don't know if either of you could argue another film that maybe has even better chances, but yeah, I would not be surprised if this one wins Best Picture. I would be thrilled if Chloe Zhao won Best Director, first female director in quite a while to win the award. And Frances McDormand actually has a shot to win Best Actress again very soon after she did for 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. But starting with you, Abby, why is this your number 5 film of the year?
So I really love Nomadland, and if it were to win Best Picture, if it were to get like all of the awards and just sweep at the Academy, I would be very happy. I think Chloe Zhao is one of the most, if not the most, empathetic filmmaker working today, and I think that's really apparent in this film. It's really beautiful. It's very gentle. It's kind of like The Mole Agent. It's another really highly empathetic and kind portrait of people trying to get by in older age. I think Frances McDormand's performance is really unique, I think, from what we're used to seeing from her, especially lately, since she previously won for 3 Billboards, and that was a very different performance. But her role as Fern here is just so sweet and like sort of slightly shy, which is not a thing that I think I'm used to seeing in a Frances McDormand performance. And it also feels very real, also because she's working with a lot of non-actors. But I think her and also David Strathairn, who's great in this too, their interactions with each other and their interactions with the people around them feel very genuine. And there's very little judgment at play here. It just feels very real and thoughtful, and it's a really nice kind of meditative way to spend that viewing time with these characters.
What about you, Will?
Yeah. So I've been seeing, since you brought it up with Best Picture, like I've been seeing some people talking about like this is going to be an asterisk year, I guess. I don't think they literally mean like an asterisk year. I think they're talking like sports wise, where like this year has to be like discredited in some way because not as many films came out and stuff like that, which I think is just ridiculous because like obviously as we're talking about in the show, like there are a ton of really good films that came out and are deserving. And I don't know why this film would even be considered like a lesser film. Like if anything, I think one of the very few like slight blessings that have come out of a situation like this for the Oscars is that this film can actually get recognized for Best Picture in a way it should. Like this is the type of film that might get completely overlooked in a lesser year or like a busier year, I guess, for cinema where like other films are competing for the title. But such a like small, intimate movie like this has a chance to stand out and really impress in a major way. While also, like Abby was saying, like have this like rich, well-earned humanity to it that is very present and very thoughtful and very meaningful, while not feeling insincere or like pandering in any particular way for a Hollywood production like this. It really did have a big impact on me when I saw it at TIFF or Virtual TIFF. And it remains like one of my favorite films from that experience, just because, like we've mentioned already, Frances McDormand is able to blend in really well with these non-traditional actors and give a really heartfelt and realistic and meaningful performance, and talk about these very present and realistic discussion points while not making it feel pandering or inauthentic. Just bring a very humane, rich, well-woven story of, you know, humanity and the American cycle right now to life in a very obviously enriching and very I'll just say enriching. I don't know where I'm leading with that, but yeah, this is one of my favorite films for that reason, and I'm really looking forward to more people checking it out when it becomes more widely available. But if it does win Best Picture, no asterisk needed. This is very much worthy of the award.
Yeah, and more people will be able to see it before the Oscars this year, mainly thanks to the Oscars not happening until a little bit later in the year than usual. But it will be hitting, I think, on demand or at least like more theatrical, screens on February 19th. So the three of us were privileged enough to see this ahead of time. So thankfully we could talk about it and everything. But yeah, I'll say I echo a lot of those sentiments. And I just think Fern, played by Frances McDormand, she's just one of my favorite characters, like written characters in 2020, and based on a book and everything. But yeah, I just think that Chloe Zhao, through her direction and her writing, just really creates a character here that, like Abby said, feels unique, feels wholly hers. And that's why I think she actually deserves to win Best Actress more than I think she did for Three Billboards. So it'd be a shame if she doesn't win simply because she won more recently for, in my opinion, a film role that was not as good. But we'll of course see, and there's a lot more to what we have to say about films and all the awards and everything. Just contextualizing it, I think that I just hope that it is a film and a performance that is more widely celebrated, because when they do get these awards attention, it raises the profile and allows other people to check them out. And I hope that is the case come February. But all right, that is our number 10/number 5 picks. Now we can move into our number 4 films of the year. I will start with one that is another outlier, and that is Pixar's Soul. And I guess not too surprising, as a lot of you and Abby will know, I of course, I am a big fan of Pixar, big fan of Pete Docter's work. And Soul is just a film that completely floored me, just in terms of its music. This is the one that is my favorite soundtrack of the year. And it just really, the animation in this just for me cannot be denied. I know a lot of people are saying that Wolfwalkers is their favorite animated film of 2020. And I totally understand that. Wolfwalkers is a fine film. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I always appreciate hand-drawn animation, especially from Cartoon Saloon. But the animation that Pixar was able to pull off with Soul, especially in terms of its story, which is about a middle-aged black man in New York City who is dealing with existential questions of his purpose and, goes on this adventure to really find out, how he can maybe make his dreams come true and learn some surprising lessons along the way. I mean, it's just such a thematically rich story. There are so many life lessons to impart through it. And I can't say enough about how beautifully in sync this movie is in terms of its animation and its music. It's jazz attention from John Baptiste, but then it's fused so well with the Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross score, which makes up this entire other world of souls like living and are about to live, I should say. And, all of the creative imagineering that Pixar is able to do with these worlds and blend them together. This is Pixar at its full Pixar. I think it's one of the finer Pixar films in general. So I find myself just so fortunate, I think, that we got to get this toward the end of 2020, right at the very end. I wish we all could have seen this on the big screen this past June when we were, originally going to, but the fact that we were able to get it on Disney Plus and a lot of people were able to see it and appreciate it is a huge plus for me, not to be glib about it. So that is Soul. I definitely am happy to have it pretty high on my list, but definitely one of my favorites of the year.
Yeah, I mean, this just barely missed my top 10. I initially had it in my number 10 spot before I finished up Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. I liked it quite a bit as well. And I think it's one of my favorite Pixar films in a good long while.
Yeah, I'm in kind of a similar boat. I liked this movie a lot, but it just barely squeaked out of my top 10.
I'm a little sad. Pete Docter is probably not going to be making another Pixar film for quite a while, if ever. So he was kind of talking about that and saying that this is kind of it for him. Now he's kind of moving into more of a leadership role at Pixar. So if this is his last film, I'm kind of happy. I think it's a good one to go out on.
I'm going to make the bold declaration that I think he's going to make another film at some point. But
maybe,
I don't know.
But it'd probably be a long time from now,
yeah.
I think, based on what he's been saying.
Sure, yeah. I don't think it's going to be like immediately. Sorry.
Yeah, I just would like to echo that a little bit and say that I'm very curious to see what Pixar looks like under the leadership of somebody who has such a strong and compassionate directorial hand. I think that it sounds like it's starting to lead to some really interesting places, and I'm fascinated to see where it goes.
Right. I should say, like, one of the main reasons he's doing this is because he's prioritizing like the next generation of Pixar filmmakers, which for me is a huge positive. I think the studio really does need like fresher perspectives, and that's really what we're getting in the next few years. So Soul for me in a funny way kind of represents that. It kind of represents sort of like one final, excellent film from the old guard.
Yeah. And I think he said, I think he said less sequels too, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, for now, fewer sequels, but he also said that they might need to put in some sequels here and there after this next run just to keep the studio afloat. Yeah.
Still, I mean, I as much as I like say Incredibles 2, that was music to my ears. So I'm really looking forward to Pixar's next step.
Yeah. I mean, the next 3 films from Pixar are all originals. So, and we just had 2 in a row. So we're definitely in a nice a little streak for Pixar of original content. I didn't mention Onward. Onward just barely missed my honorable mentions, but it is a great film. I found myself really enjoying the animation in that one, and it's just not quite the same level. I don't think that film really hit me quite as hard in all respects, even though it did have a wonderful third act, I thought. But yeah, Onward, it's kind of like another Monsters University, one that I appreciated a lot, but definitely, like, looking back on it, I think that it wasn't a film that was for everybody, I suppose, because I feel like I enjoyed it a lot more than a lot of other people did. But okay, Will Ashton, your number 4 film of 2020.
Oh boy. All right. So number 4, this is the film that I'm going to have the hardest time selling to people, because I couldn't even get you and I believe Abby to see it either, because of the reasons I'm going to mention in a little bit. So
I'll just say it's the length. It's too long.
I know.
I could not find the time.
And believe me, I understand. So yeah, my number 4 pick is the newest documentary from Frederick Wiseman, which is City Hall. As John mentioned, this is a 4.5-hour film about the inner workings of Boston, primarily from a government standpoint, but also just like the local residents, some of the small businesses in the area, a lot of the local citizens. And for me, that leads into why I believe it's one of the best films of the year. Now, I understand that 4.5 hours is a long time to commit to a film where ostensibly not a lot happens. I know when I was looking at my options for TIFF, I was like, I saw this movie on there and I'm like, there's no way I'm devoting 4.5 hours to a documentary about Boston. But I heard all these amazing things about the movie. I was like, you know what? I'll go for it. I'll try it. I'll break it up into 2 sittings and I'll watch this movie. And I'm so glad I did, because to me, I mean, in traditional Frederick Wiseman fashion, I've only seen one of his films previous to this, which is his first film, Titicut Follies. But this film, it primarily follows this perspective of Mayor Marty Walsh, who I believe was just added to the Joe Biden administration, I believe this week, which is going to be very interesting based on this film.
Yeah.
But it primarily follows his perspective, which is the kind of more liberal-minded, earnest, kind of no BS guy, or at least trying to be no BS guy, who is just trying to add more progressive viewpoints to a traditional kind of conservative town, help to lead to what he hopes would be a better future for the town, and basically moving past the massacre that happened in Boston a few years prior. But what I think really makes this movie so good is that it also shows the perspective of the various other citizens in town who, they're hopeful about the future, but they also have their own concerns, and we get to hear from their perspectives. We get to see various different, just like day-to-day reactions, including a pretty fantastic scene where a bed gets through a trash compactor, which I think has become one of the more talked about scenes of the film, just because it shows Wiseman's patience and willingness to just show these very kind of minute details that most filmmakers would just cut out of the film. And it's very hard to explain, but like just seeing a huge bed go through a trash compactor is fascinating through Wiseman's vision, because he is bringing so much empathy and natural curiosity to his vision, where everything just seems very minor and banal, but through his vision, there is an urgency and a curiosity to it that really brings a lot of life and inspiration to this film. So I really hope people check it out, or at least try it, because I can understand the hesitation to check it out. But I really think this is some of the best filmmaking of the year, and I'm really glad I got a chance to check it out. So that's City Hall.
All right, if you say so, Will. I mean, I've never been told I should watch a movie for the trash compactor portion of it, so that is unique.
Yeah, I guess it's the best since Brave Little Toaster.
All right, let's get into then our number 4 picks. Abby, your number 4 pick is my number 7 pick. So I'll say real fast, Sound of Metal. This film, Abby, I was kind of surprised. I thought I was going to be the only one who had it on the top 10. But of course, you outbid me and you put it a little bit higher. But this is, of course, the new film from Darius Marder. It stars Riz Ahmed and Olivia Cooke, Paul Raci, and I know you were a big fan of it, of course, especially the Paul Raci performance. But this is a film that was very personal to me, and I just found myself, I was so happy that it was on Prime Video, so a lot of people were able to check it out. But Abby, why is Sound of Metal your number 4 of the year?
I think Sound of Metal is just, it's a really interestingly made film from a variety of perspectives. I think it does a lot of great work with the combination of cinematography and sound design. I really like it when a movie shows you what those roles really can do, like kind of on an elemental level. I say that because I have taught a course on how to watch a movie like a film critic, and one of the things that I've talked about is sound design and sound editing. So I feel like this is a great, almost classroom example of how that can be used to really communicate perspective. Also, I think the performances in it are really good. Riz Ahmed obviously is really strongly committed and goes through just an emotional ringer through his character's experience. The real winner for me, of course, we already talked about it a little bit, is Paul Raci. Just because he's a fascinating person in real life, as we've started to find out through all the stuff coming out around the film. But also just his character is so lived in and feels so real. And there's some real emotional conflict that goes on between him and Riz Ahmed's character. And I feel like the scenes that they have together just beautifully communicate their very different perspectives, as well as how some of the lessons that Rachi's character, Joe, teaches Riz Ahmed's character how to, in terms of how to deal with his new reality, basically, of being a deaf person in a hearing world, and how that finally comes across in like some of the film's final moments. I just think that there's so much of this that is just really dramatically impressive, and I think it's one of the best of the year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's just a film that's just brought me to the brink, you know. It's a story about a guy who just feels like he is losing everything, you know, not just his hearing, but then, you know, it's also a film about redemption, and then, you know, redemption for your redemption. You know, there's so many turns in it. I'll admit there was some challenging material in it, stuff that I'm still wrestling with, particularly how it, you know, communicates the values and the, you know, restrictions that he faces with the deaf community. I shouldn't say restrictions, I suppose, but like, you know, just some of the mores that he just can't seem to fully, you know, click with. And yeah, the way this movie ends, I just think it's a beautiful, perfect ending for this film. And I'd say Riz Ahmed, he's one of my picks for best actor. I just think that this performance, like you said, is so committed, and it's just so heartfelt. And, you know, a lot of other performances like this, I would cringe and I'd find the main character very unlikable because they're unreasonable, and none of that happens with this guy. I just, you know, especially because of the writing and the way they weave in, you know, his addiction, how that coincides with his, you know, his struggle with, you know, how he has to like cope with, you know, being addicted to hearing in a way. It's such a fascinating parallel there that I think is, it makes it one of the can't miss films of the year, I think. So yeah, very, very, very good film, and definitely one of my favorites. Not quite as high, but definitely a reflection of films that I valued the most this year. So that is Sound of Metal. And with that, we can move on to our number 3 picks. And my number 3 pick is another kind of horror film. I mean, the only other one that was kind of horror for me was She Dies Tomorrow. We haven't talked much about horror so far, except for like the Mortuary Collection and that film I mentioned. But I have to say, I think this one, you know, definitely, I don't know what it was. It just hit me at the right time, but Possessor, the latest film from a Cronenberg, right? So it's Brandon Cronenberg's film that he wrote and directed. And it stars Andrea Riseborough, Christopher Abbott, and Tuppence Middleton, Sean Bean, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Rosa Sutherland. And this film, you know, without getting too much into it, because I think the premise is like an easy sell, but I think people see the poster and they're like, well, you know, I don't want to watch this. This is going to just be like a gore fest. And sure, it kind of is. But I think what really sells me on this is like, it hooks you in with its premise of like, oh, you know, the perfect assassination is if you can possess a human being, kind of take on their life, pretend to be them, and then do the murder so that it could never be traced back to you. It's a fantastic premise. It raises so many questions. It does what sci-fi is supposed to do. But not only is it sci-fi horror in terms of how it gets graphic, how it gets violent, but it's also a psychological horror, because you start to experience like what real possession does to people and how that relates to what people are doing in real life. And it's just such a fascinating story in that respect. I think the final 30 minutes of this film are very trippy, and it's, it's not for everybody, I will admit, but for me, I was mesmerized. When we do our top 10 films, Will knows for sure. Whenever a film can spellbound me in its third act, I find myself really willing to elevate it to another level, because I think it's really hard to nail the third act. And I think this is one of the few films, especially in this genre, that does it in spades. I know I'm one of the ones who liked Possessor quite a bit more, I think, than you two did. I don't even know if it's on like your honorable mentions or anything, but I am happy to put it pretty high on my list. It's definitely one of my favorites of the year, and proud of it. I'm glad a horror film was this high up. I don't always have horror that high up, unfortunately, because I guess I just have a very specific taste for horror films in general. But yeah, Possessor. I am, of course, a big fan. All right. Okay. Will, we can't do your number 3 quite yet, because it is, I know, it's coming up though, because your number 3 is Abby's number 1 film. So we're going to have to hold on that.
Yeah. I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah. But for now, Abby, we can go to you, because your number 3 film, it's in my honorable mentions. It's definitely a great film. I strongly considered it for my top 10. And I remember, well, I think you liked it as well. But Abby, what is your number 3?
My number 3 might come as a surprise, because I think when we first talked about it on the podcast, I was a little cooler on it. But since our discussion, and I think possibly in part because of our discussion, I've watched it a couple of times since, and I've just been more and more impressed with just the consistency of it. It's Sean Durkin's The Nest, which is the film about Carrie Coon and Jude Law as a couple in the 1980s who relocate with their children from New York to England, sort of where Jude Law's character is from, and kind of based on his professional whims, and things very quickly fall apart after they do that. I think this is a movie that I think the thing that impresses me the most is the way, well, first it's efficiency, because it tells you a lot about what you need to know about the characters with very little. Like, a lot of it is not even outright stated. It's just based on actions. It's based really on performance. And I think there's a lot of consistency across the board, where you just see like an impressive ability for everybody to kind of be on the same page and know what kind of movie it is that they're making. And that contributes to my other favorite thing about The Nest, which is its use of tone. I think that the way this movie is shot and the way that it is performed is like, the script, I think, could have been any genre. It really would have taken very little for it to be like a melodrama, for example, or a coming of age story. But instead, the way that Durkin chooses to shoot it, and the way that he kind of captures the performances, it feels a lot more like a horror movie, which I think is a fascinating form of genre experimentation. And I think that the reason it works so well is because everybody seems really sold on what this is going to be and how they're going to act. So I think it lends to some really impressive performances from both Jude Law and Carrie Coon, who I think give some of the best performances of the year in those roles. And yeah, I think that it's really impressive to see a movie that is really built and executed in such a consistent and strong way that I think really speaks to Durkin's ability as a director, not just visually, but also I think in his ability to communicate what it is he wants to his actors and get them all kind of in the same space.
Yeah, I one thing you said there that definitely cannot be said enough is I think The Nest is a masterclass in show don't tell, right? Where, like you said, it's like the characters don't have to say what they're feeling, you just get it. And yeah, This is one of the first times I've really been able to see, because I never saw The Leftovers, but being able to see Carrie Coon really just like the height of her talent, or I shouldn't even say the height, but like the height of her talent as I've seen it, you know, because I guess I'm more familiar with her for like, I don't know, Avengers, Infinity War. I hate to say, but the stuff I have seen her in, you know, she's always been really good, and The Nest is such a great showcase for her. So yeah, I'm a super big fan of The Nest as well. It's definitely a contender for me. It almost made it into my top 10.
Yeah, this almost made my honorable mentions. I really did like it a good bit as well, as for many of the reasons you mentioned. But yeah, it just didn't quite hit there as high. But it has two of my favorite performances of the year for sure.
All right, let's get into our number 2 films. And so we're getting close to the finish line, and we'll go through our number 2 films. All of them are kind of outliers for our lists, and then we will, of course, go through our honorable mentions. But all right, the first one is my number 2, which is Minari. And Minari is another film that I was very fortunate enough to see in a theatrical setting because of Sundance. And it's going to be hitting on demand on the 15th. So a lot of you will finally be able to see it as well. I know, Abby, you had a chance to see Minari as well. And yeah, I know we had a little minor scuffle about some chicken stuff that happens in this movie. But other than that, I hope you can agree that it is a very heartwarming drama, family drama. And for me, what really resonates about this one, this is from Lee Isaac Chung, is its story about what the American dream does to families without like villainizing it beyond recognition. I think sometimes like movies that go after the American dream can maybe like over villainize to make their point. And that's fine, I guess, for some films. But, you know, with this one, it really is more, it's less about like there's something inherently wrong with the American dream and more about like there's something inherently wrong with thinking there's only one American dream at all. And really, like, life and family in America can mean a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be this very specific, stereotypical, like materialistic goal. Even though there is value in a father who is making this farm and working really hard just because he wants to do something for his family. But Minari examines a lot of the selfishness that he takes on in that pursuit. And what keeps the film from just being a downer in that regard is because, you know, Steven Yeun, first of all, is fantastic in this movie and really sells the sympathy you have for this father. But it really is the supporting cast here. I struggle even to say supporting cast because it is very much an ensemble. Han Ye-ri, Alan Kim, Noh Kei-cho, Yeon Jung, Will Patton, who gets such a fun role in this. It really is every single one of these stories and more. I think specifically we spend so much time with the kids and their grandmother and just how they're taking everything in, you know, as in the backdrop, you have the struggle of this father trying to please his wife and his kids. Yeah, this is just a film that definitely brought me to such an emotional place. And, you know, it was another personal film for me, made me think a lot about my own family. You know, this is a Korean American family. It made me think of like the things that like my father did in order to make it in America, you know, when they came here, not knowing the language. And it's just movies like this that, you know, I always feel like there only one person could have made a film quite like this, and I think that was Lee Isaac Chung, and I'm so glad he got his chance to do so because it is a tremendous film, and it's another film composed by Emile Nasseri, who, my goodness, yeah, another one. This is probably my third favorite soundtrack of the year behind Kajillionaire, which he also did the score for, and Soul, as I mentioned. But yeah, that's Minari, and Will, I know you're gonna hopefully see it soon. I hope you enjoy it nearly as much as I did, because that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, this is definitely one of the ones I was most disappointed not to get a chance to see, but I'm certainly looking forward to it whenever I can.
All right. Will, Ashton, your number 2 film of 2020.
Yeah, so I think, you know, if I were to make a estimation on what would be my number 1 film of this year, this would probably be it. But, you know, I saw one other film that I liked a little bit more. But my number 2 pick is Charlie Kaufman's third film as a director, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which is based on the novel of the same name by Ian Reid. I did get a chance to read it. And this is one of those adaptations that I think is actually a little bit better than the book itself. Not that I have anything particularly against the book itself, but I think the book's themes on like regret and grief and this sort of existential drive to find some sense of conclusion in life, it takes a very expected path. And Charlie Kaufman, I think to his immense credit, is someone who tends to avoid expectations, tends to really dive into cerebral, but in very visually interesting and funny, but also very deeply sad ways. I've really connected with a lot of his films in the past, and I'd say this one, I don't think it's his best necessarily. I tend to like some of his other more recent films a little bit more, but this one, it does have everything that I tend to like in a Charlie Kaufman film. The existentialism, like I mentioned, but also just the heady conversations, the sort of like displacement of not really feeling like you understand or fit into a certain reality, the kind of morbid sense of realism that like you can't really put a hold on time, and just kind of you're just barely hanging on, trying to make sense of it. It would make a very good companion piece if you're really sad, I guess, with She Dies Tomorrow. But yeah, this film, it's definitely one of the ones I'm most disappointed I didn't get a chance to see. I believe it had a very select theatrical release, but unfortunately, because of 2020 being what it is, I didn't get a chance to see in theaters like a lot of the films on my list. But yeah, this is one of the ones I'm mourning the most, because it does feel like the type of film, even though it is a Netflix film, that really feels like it should be processed and seen in full on a big screen. But unfortunately, the opportunity was not given to me this year. Nevertheless, it does have a lot of things that I think really works well on the small screen, including our lead performances from Jessie Buckley and Jesse Plemons, who are always good. We've championed their past performances. I know certainly John's a big fan of Wild Rose, which came out the year prior, but I think this is a continued testament to her greatness and her star power. She is continuing to do a lot of great stuff, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what she does after this. But yeah, she really nails it. But I think it's also obviously Jesse Plemons' films in a lot of different respects for reasons I can't dive into in full. But yeah, I think they're both great, and Kaufman brings some of my favorite scenes of the year to life in this film, including a long dance scene, which might be my number one scene of the year, just for how it communicates a lot of the themes of films while also being very artistic and moody and hard to place, which tends to be a running theme in my list, particularly for 2020. But yeah, I could go on and on with how much I like the film, but I'd rather just people watch it. So that's my number 2 pick. I'm thinking of ending things.
All right. Yeah. Great film. And yeah, we've kind of mentioned it already, but a lot of Netflix films on this list, as I think, kind of to be expected considering Netflix made so much of our viewing habits this year. But okay, Abby, this is one of the first films I think you talked about as one of our like regular co-hosts. It's one that you turned me on to, and definitely, I think you talked about this in the episode you did, the first one you did with Will, and it was just you two. And I saw it as well and was a big fan. So tell us all about your number 2 film.
Yeah, my number 2 film is the Alexander Nanau documentary Collective, a Romanian documentary about both journalists and a particularly dedicated civil servant trying to fix the country's extremely broken healthcare system after it kind of comes to light after a really disastrous accident claims the lives of a large number of Romanians in the capital and continues to claim the lives of several more while they're in the hospital. It's definitely not an upper of a movie. It's pretty much a bummer all the way down. But I think it is a really fascinating, almost David Simon style example of different sectors of a community and how they respond to a specific event and how they do their jobs. I think in particular his Nanau's portrayal of what it's like to work on an investigative journalism piece as somebody who had to do that this year feels spot on. This is a movie that, like, the twists and turns of the plot feel very much like, I don't know, say like a Dark Water or Aaron Brockovich style, like based on a true story movie. But like they're really happening. Like you're watching them as they happen in real time, and you're watching actual people reacting to these events, which I think is fascinating. So it's really dramatically compelling. There's a lot of interesting thematic stuff. It's not super complimentary of Romania. It's kind of a bummer in terms of looking at political corruption. But there are some glimmers of hope, and some of the people that Nanau does profile are doing really great things. And it can be kind of inspiring to watch people just be so good at their jobs. So that's several of the many reasons why I like Collective and why it's my number 2.
Yeah, I have to say the the scene in Collective where they show the fire itself and how that happens, the most horrifying scene in all of 2020. Like, that just sunk in my gut. It is horrifying. Absolutely.
Yeah,
horrifying.
there's a couple of elements in that movie that are really hard to watch, to the point where, like, the first time that I watched it, when it opened that way, I almost left. I saw it at the True Falls Festival, and I kind of saw it on a whim. And when I went in and sat down, and that happened so early, I was like, I don't know if I can handle this. But I made myself sit and watch the rest of it, and I was so glad that I did.
It just like invokes so much fear, like just primal fear in you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just gonna say I got a chance to check this out yesterday when I was catching up on some films. I watched it through a virtual cinema, and it didn't make my top 10, but I got very close. I echo a lot of what you said as well. And there's also, in addition to the fire scene you're talking about, without giving it away, there's also a scene involving bugs that, and I'm not really like a big bug guy, but that scene is going to be one that's gonna haunt me for at least a good while. So there's
that
a lot
one's
of,
branded in my brain as well.
Yeah. So a lot of memorable imagery in this film, to say the least.
Yeah, memorable is a good way to put it. But all right, those are our number 2 films. We've gone through so many films so far, but we are going to get into our honorable mentions. First, though, we have our last voicemail we're going to play for you all. This is from Taylor, a regular voicemail contributor, and Taylor let us know his 2 favorite films of 2020. Here they are.
The Five Bloods is a movie I know I'm going to love, but I haven't had the time to watch it yet, and I sort of want to set aside some time when it's probably just me in my room watching it on my TV, alone, nobody can bug me. Some movies I just like watching that way. But my favorite films of the year, I have to be honest, I thought that this year was a stinker for obvious reasons. But there were 2 films that I really, really, really enjoyed. One is Soul. And I think that's sort of an easy answer for a lot of people. I felt like it was a really creative, fresh bit of content. I feel like we live in a time when there's so little original content that anytime I get some, it's like, kids to a candy store almost. And Pete Docter, I just really admire as a director, and his Pixar films tend to be my favorite Pixar films, so that is one of them. And then also a film that pleasantly surprised me. Now, I'm not going to say that it's like the best movie ever made, but it's one that I certainly enjoyed and thought that it too, although it is linked to a story that has been done many, many times, I think it was a unique and enjoyable version of it, and that was The Invisible Man with Elizabeth Moss. I really enjoyed myself throughout that film, so I recommend that highly.
All right. Yeah. I saw a lot of love for Invisible Man on a lot of top 10 lists, which was really nice to see this year. I think that Leigh Whannell's film there was a great start to 2020. I don't think it made any of our honorable mentions, if I'm not mistaken, but yeah, I know I was a fan of it, and it's not my favorite Elizabeth Moss performance. That definitely is Shirley, which is another film that was definitely in contention for me for one of my favorites of the year. But yeah, Invisible Man, looking back, I'm glad that it was like one of the only like pop culture blockbuster films that came out in 2020. Another one is Birds of Prey. It's like the only superhero film we saw, or a comic book film, I should say, in theaters. So it's kind of wild to think that that is the case. There are no superhero films to be found anywhere on our list, I don't think, including like Wonder Woman 1984, and there just weren't a lot in general either.
I wanted to say that you mentioning Birds of Prey makes me so mad that I forgot to include it on my honorable mentions or top 10 list. It potentially I know now I can. It potentially would have made it into my honorable mentions, because it's been such a long year that and I watched it so early on in the pandemic that I keep forgetting that it's a movie that came out this year, but it's so good, and it was a real delight during a particularly dark early time of the pandemic when we weren't really sure what was going on or how long anything was going to last. So that was one of my personal bright spots this year.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very, very fun film. And yeah, not one that I loved, but definitely one that I certainly appreciated quite a bit. And Abby, why don't you go ahead and go through your honorable mentions? What are the films that just narrowly missed your top 10, but you still want to shout them out real fast?
Sure thing. My honorable mentions that are not Birds of Prey or Invisible Man, both of which I liked quite a lot, include Palm Springs, which we have kind of already talked about, and we've talked about a bit about why I liked it. The Vast of Night is my number 2 honorable mention. I feel like that was another movie that did a lot with a very small budget, and I think achieved an atmosphere that feels it felt really unique, I think, for the kind of movie that it was making, and I appreciated that. My number 3 is Soul, which we've talked about a little bit. My number 4 is Corey Finley's Bad Education, which came out on HBO earlier this year. I really liked this movie a lot. I thought it had some really excellent performances. I saw this at Toronto in 2019, and it was kind of a weird toggle because it was being released on HBO, whether it was like a movie or a TV movie. But the way that things ended up shaking out, it made my list as a movie. My number 5 is Mucho Mucho Amor, the Walter Mercado documentary that is on Netflix currently. That was one of my favorite viewing experiences at the True False Festival last year, and there are a lot of elements of that movie that I think I'm going to be remembering for a really long time. My number 6 is Minari. Chicken sexing aside, I think it's a movie that I appreciated. I maybe didn't love quite as much as some of the stuff on my top 10 list, but I have a lot of appreciation for what Lee Isaac Chung is doing and for the really strong ensemble performances in that movie. My number 7 is Karen Main's film Yes, God, Yes, which I caught at South by Southwest in 2019 and finally came out, I think, on digital and then later on Netflix this year. And that was one that spoke very personally to me and my own experiences growing up, kind of like the protagonist does, around the turn of the millennium in a Christian community. There's a lot about that rings extremely true, like frighteningly on the nose to some of my own experiences. And it was a very entertaining and kind of entertaining in like a cringe way experience that was both nostalgic and slightly painful. My number 8 is The Wolf of Snow Hollow, Jim Cummings' follow-up film that I believe we talked about on this podcast a while back, and I still really enjoy a lot of the elements that I found strong the first time around. I still find really compelling. My number 9 is Scare Me, the Shudder released film about writers trying to come up with scary stories in a cabin. Yet again, another movie that I think makes a strong use of a limited budget and a limited location. And in this case, an extremely limited location. And it's really fun to be kind of stuck in a room with these people for like an hour and a half. I don't think I'd want to be stuck in a room with any of them for longer than that, but for the time that it is, I think it's really effective. My number 10 runner-up is the 40-Year-Old Version, which again we talked about on this podcast a while back. I really liked kind of the lived-in feeling of Rada Blank's movie. I also really liked His House, which we've also talked about, Remy Weeks's film. I also liked Natalie Erica James's Relic, and I also liked Wolfwalkers, Cartoon Saloon's hand-drawn Irish animated film, which I would not mind seeing the best animation Oscar going to that movie, although I'd be fine with it going to Soul as well. And my last 2, finally, I have to shout out to Five Bloods because like Lawrence Solidarity, KU professor Kevin Wilmot co-wrote that film and I thought did a great job. And my number 15 is Bloody Nose Empty Pockets, wildly enough, because that was a movie I had a really strong negative reaction to watching it the first time. Considering it and watching it since then, I think it's just a really unique piece of art. I think what the Ross brothers are doing there is just wildly different from most other things that a lot of other filmmakers are doing. And I think even having a strong negative reaction to it, I think it's a movie that's going to inspire strong reactions. And I feel like that's what great art should do. So that's why it's my number 15.
All right, that is a very strong list of films. And I have to just mention that I never thought in a million years that the phrase chicken sexing aside, whatever, make it to the Cinemaholic stream. But here we are. It's a new year.
Here we are.
There we go.
That's what happens when you have a former Mother Earth living employee on your podcast.
Yep.
You get farming expertise, weirdly enough.
All right. I'll go through my honorable mentions real fast here. And a lot of these were in my top 10 at one point or another. And, you know, again, there's strong contenders everywhere. It really just comes down to very arbitrary decisions I had to make. But there is I'm Your Woman, which we talked about recently on the show, the new film with Rachel Brosnahan that was just, for me, a triumph of like 70s crime drama thrillers that we don't usually get these days. There's also Tommaso, the latest Abe Ferreira film with Willem Dafoe, which I think Will said was on his to-watch list. Very big fan of that film, as I really enjoy Ferreira's films. True History of the Kelly Gang, one of the only real deal Westerns to come out in 2020, and it just happened to be one of the best. George McKay, Russell Crowe, man, this movie just owns in so many ways. It's such a great Ned Kelly film and a testament to Ned Kelly's legacy on cinema itself. Very sad that this did not end up being in my top 10. The Painter and the Thief, which got mentioned as a 2-watch, I think, from you, Abby. Yeah, this is a fantastic documentary, wonderful, story about redemption and the criminal system and how it's way better in other countries than ours, honestly. There's also The Nest, which, I went back and forth. I was really close to including this. It's just such a terrific film, and I love Sean Durkin's work. Boy State, which we got to talk about on the show a couple times, I think. This is the documentary, another one I got to see in theaters, and just such a great microcosm of American politics, but, not totally depressing. There's a lot of optimism, and, I think it's the kind of documentary that I think if we watched it today, it would maybe hit different based on certain things that have transpired the last couple months. And then Kajillionaire. I can't say enough good things about Kajillionaire, so I won't even anymore. It's such a wonderful film, such a wonderful cast of characters. There's also Time, which I don't think we've talked about yet. This is it's on Amazon Prime, the documentary about the justice system and about a single mother raising her kids. It's such a fascinating documentary using really just archival home video footage to tell a touching story about a family pushed to their limits. And it resonated with me quite a bit. Similarly so was His House, which Abby, you mentioned, that Remy Weeks horror film that it's such a great haunted house concept. Martin Eden, which I know we've talked about a little bit. This film absolutely was my jam. I love the idea of adapting an American Jack London tale, but through Italian cinema. That's just like combining two ice cream flavors and making something delicious. It just, or I guess I should say gelato. Martin Eden is absolutely a wonderful watch. I fell in love with it. I know it's not everybody's jam, but it certainly was mine. Then there's Shithouse, which I got to thank Will Ashton for telling me about. It was under my radar, but great coming of age college film from a first time director who just has such a great artistic voice. I really fell in love with that whole film's shtick, and it has one of my favorite opening scenes in a film of 2020. Dick Johnson is Dead, another Netflix film. This documentary, just brought me nothing but joy and heart and warmth, and I've never seen a better case for like why a daughter making a film about her dad should be seen by everyone. It's just a beautiful film inside and out. Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets. As Abby, you kind of mentioned, it's a very strange film, but it's such a great piece of art. Such a great mix of like documentary and acting, but in a way that somehow still feels true to life. It's pretty extraordinary. Yes, God, Yes. Another film from you mentioned, Abby. This film made me laugh. It made me cringe, but at the very end of it, it just made me feel just a wonderful pang of nostalgia myself. And I'm a sucker for films that are about the early 2000s. It's a realm that we haven't seen quite enough of yet, I think, as we're the years are going by. And then finally, Collective, which of course, just hit me and horrified me, but also is so instructive and such an important film. And then I'll add a last one because I put in an extra, and that's Anything for Jackson. Just going to reiterate, great horror film. Definitely worth time for horror fans. It's on Shudder, and hope more people see it. But okay, those are my honorable mentions. Will Ashton, what say you?
Yeah, so I'm probably going to be repeating at least a few of these, but no matter. My number 11 pick, what would have been my number 10 pick if I hadn't seen Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always before we recorded, was Soul. as we mentioned, but I also really liked Mank, which I'm clearly in the minority, I guess, on that one. I thought it was quite good. And I thought David Fincher made a very sweet little movie for his dad, while also make a very cynical and bleak movie about the movie making machine known as Hollywood. But no last, I don't know. I'll defend that movie still. I also really liked Our Time Machine, which will be a nice little companion piece to a film that was Abby's number 1 pick and my number 3 pick. I won't give it away just yet. As Abby mentioned, I also really liked Bad Education, which I almost forgot about because it feels like that March just feels like an eternity from now. But I really did like that film quite a bit. And I think that's some of Hugh Jackman's best work, as well as a great supporting performance from Ray Romano, as well as always. Collective, as we mentioned already, I think that was a really just hard-hitting documentary that just reminds me why I love journalism and film so much. I hope people, if they can handle it, will check it out. I also seem to be the strongest fan of Lovers Rock, which is the second film in the Small Axe collection. I was really taken by it, and I can definitely see why this movie has made quite a few top 10 lists. It's certainly some of the most euphoric filmmaking that I've seen this year, and I think some of Steve McQueen's best work as well. Likewise, I really like the last installment in Small Axe, which was called Education. That's the shortest installment as well, but I think it has some of the deepest meaning. And also, for somewhat personal reasons, it hit me pretty hard as well. This is one that I haven't seen on basically anyone's list, which is a shame, because I will continue to defend Disney Plus's Timmy Failure, Mistakes Were Made, which, I don't know if it's a top 10 movie, but I think it is quite good. And I think it's a lot better than some people are giving it credit for. And I think that was a wonderful follow-up for Tom McCarthy for Spotlight. I really hope people check that one out at some point, because I think it deserves more viewership than it's ultimately gotten so far, especially with Disney bearing it. Spontaneous, which is a film that when we first covered it on the show, well, I hadn't finished it at the time, so I didn't have a concrete opinion, but I was a little bit more negative than I ultimately am now. That's one of the few films I've seen this year that, as time progresses, I think I've actually grown to like this one more and more, to the point where this one is actually rising up in my estimation quite a bit. I really hope people check that movie out, because I think it's one of the better teen stories that we've seen in recent years. Probably my favorite movie that was shot in Pittsburgh this year was I'm Your Woman, with American Pickle coming in second in that regard. To echo what you two have said, I think it's quite good, and I hope more people check that out on Amazon Prime. Likewise, on Amazon Prime, there's A Vast Night, which Abby mentioned already. That was my first drive-in movie of 2020, and that, for a lot of reasons, in addition to it being a very strong film, I think it's also just a very nice little memory to have of seeing a movie on the big screen again, going out and feeling some hope again. So I have very nostalgic and warm feelings for that film for a lot of reasons. One I checked out recently that's on Hulu right now is The Painter and the Thief, which I know, John, you're a big fan of. You're the one that told me to check it out, so I have to thank you for that. I was quite taken by it. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it at first, but as it went along, especially by the end, I think that's one of my favorite end shots of 2020. I really hope people check that one out, because that's another film that seems to be kind of flying under the radar, but it is quite good. And I've also heard good things from our good friend Cobb on that film. Sound of Metal, you two have... sorry, were you saying something, John?
I was just laughing.
Okay. Sound of Metal, I'll just echo what you two have said. I think it's some of the best filmmaking of the year, and Riz Ahmed and I'm sorry, what's the guy's name? Paul
Raci.
Paul Raci. Some of the best performances of the year, and I can't say more nice things about it. 76 Days, which is a documentary about the COVID outbreak in Wuhan. I don't know if a lot of people have checked this one out, but it is on virtual cinemas. I saw it at TIFF, and it's some of the most affecting filmmaking I've seen this year. I mean, it's definitely a tough watch to watch in this time, but if you can handle it, I think it is some of the most gripping documentary filmmaking I've seen this year. And then I'll end it with The Wolf House, which I just saw this one last night, and I don't fully know where I stand on it, because it's a very, very surreal, dark, just unsettling stop motion animated film from a German Chilean production, I believe. And it feels like a nightmare watching it, because I saw it very late last night to catch up on it. It's only 76 minutes, but it clearly had an effect on me, and I'm still wrestling with it. And I'm very curious if you, Abby, and John get a chance to check it out, because I think it's some of the best animation I've seen this year, and it just saddens me and angers me that this is probably going to get overlooked for Trolls World Tour, something like that. Who knows? But it is some of the most haunting filmmaking, animation, or otherwise, I've seen this year, and I was glad I got a chance to check that one out just before we made our list. So yeah, those are my honorable mentions.
Yeah, great list. Lots of films on there that I also really enjoyed. Spontaneous, really good. I'm glad you found room for it. And also, yeah, Lovers Rock. I was surprised it wasn't quite as high for me, but yeah, I've seen it on so many top 10 lists. And yeah, we could talk all day about so many films in 2020, mainly because we talked all year about films in 2020. It was a strong year, surprisingly so, I think, or at least surprising for some. But with that, let's move on and finish the show with our number one films of 2020. First up, it's a film that's been mentioned on the show already, but I, of course, not a big surprise to a lot of people who have been listening, and they know I'm a big fan of this one. But yes, Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods. This is the Netflix film that came out in around June of this year. And, first of all, I'll say, I think this is the first time a Netflix film was my number one film of the year. And, Netflix has come such a long way, I think. There's been years where there have been Netflix films that have come close for me, films like Marriage Story and Roma. But yeah, Da 5 Bloods, I think, is like this to me, like, represents where, the potential, the strength of this studio really bringing streaming films to a wider audience. And I just have to say, if Delroy Lindo doesn't get Oscar attention for his performance here, I think something is seriously wrong with the Academy, and I already think that to an extent. But man, the rest of this cast, Jonathan Majors, Clark Peters, Norm Lewis, Isaiah Whitlock Jr., you have Chadwick Boseman here, and we didn't mention Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, but I have a feeling as Oscar season gets underway, we'll probably be talking more about that film. I don't think it's a film that any of us really appreciated as much as we appreciated some other films. But yeah, in terms of Chadwick Boseman, one of his final performances, just unforgettable in Da 5 Bloods. This is the kind of movie that it combines some of my favorite genres and genres I don't think we get enough of anymore. And that's this swashbuckling adventure, let's find a treasure kind of movie, the kind of just throwback filmmaking that feels alive to me. And just watching these men confront their past traumas and explore this part of Vietnam, and obviously everything's going to go wrong, and all of that stuff is just beautifully brought. And it's just amazing to me that Spike Lee is still making masterpieces at this level, and just such an accomplished director. And I just think that this is one of his finest films, especially for me. And I'm really glad that it made plenty of top 10 lists. A lot of people are praising the film rightfully, I think. And I can't say enough good things about Da 5 Bloods, so I suppose I will leave it at that, because we have to move on to Will Ashton, your number one film 2020.
Yeah, so you two have both mentioned your honorable mentions, but my number one pick was the Ross Brothers film Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets. To echo what you two have said, there is something about the film that it just feels very distinctly unique in that it's projected to be a documentary. It's made to look like a documentary, but it's really kind of a fact pseudo art project kind of thing, where we follow the last day of this bar in kind of the outskirts of Vegas. We see an assorted batch of characters who have either been longtime regulars, or they're just kind of moseying in and, sharing their regrets for not being a bigger part of this bar's history. But the movie itself, I just think there's something about this film, especially coming in at the end of 2020. And I find myself very reflective on what this year has been like, and where we've come at this point. And there's just such a communal bond to this film that is so beautiful, not only for what's on screen here with our mix of actors and non-traditional actors, but also just the filmmaking here that's trying so many different unique things from a creative and also just metaphoric standpoint, that I just think there's so much here that I was able to gravitate towards and really value and appreciate, just for being so vibrant and full of life and humorous and sad. And it's just such a beautiful, weird little movie that I know I guess didn't hit Abby as hard on the first watch, but I when I saw it, it just floored me. And it's the one that I've found myself really thinking back on the most fondly this year. So that's Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets. It's basically if you're a fan of Nathan For You, it's sort of like the film version of Smokers Allowed. Which
I was going to say that. Yeah. It's just like that.
Yeah, I think I described it as like if Smokers Allowed was adapted by Richard Linklater and then directed by Andrew Boglowski, if I'm pronouncing his name right, with like a bunch of Harmony Korine characters just kind of moseying in before last call. If that interests you in the film, go check it out. I think you're going to like it a lot. It's 99 cents a rent on Amazon last I checked. If that's not your thing and you're just going to be off put by a bunch of drunk weirdos, just kind of moseying about for long hours of the night, I can understand it's not your thing, but it really did hit the spot for me, and I'm looking forward to check this out again at some point. So that's Blay Knows Empty Pockets.
I was just going to add, I feel like you could probably throw in that like it feels like a Merle Haggard or Tom Waits album of a certain era.
Oh yeah,
like if those were combined and like brought to shocking and kind of creepy life.
Yeah, it's like if like their cover just like came to life and you could watch a film of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so Abby, we are going to be finishing things up with your number one film of the year, and I just want to say it's kind of fascinating to me how your number one film of the year is a Netflix film as well. It's Will's number 3 film, and tons of Netflix on our list. A lot of Netflix, some Disney Plus, some Hulu, some Amazon Prime. I mean, in terms of streaming services, it seems to me like Netflix kind of rose above the rest, but it's really close for a lot of other films. Like I think that the streaming services really brought it across the board, and I think this film is definitely indicative of that. And I already mentioned it in my honorables, but Abby, take it away. This is your number one film, and then Will, you'll get to talk about it as well since it's your number 3.
For sure. So my number one film of the year is Kirsten Johnson's documentary, Dick Johnson is Dead. This one, I loved it so much when I saw it back in March, and I've watched it again since and love it just as much. I think it's a really interesting portrayal of both Johnson's relationship with her dad, as well as kind of the emotional journey of what it feels like to have a parent that you really love and to watch them kind of towards the end of their life, how that feels both for you and for them. I feel like it's really emotionally, it feels very true. I think there's a lot of obviously really great humor in this as well, since she is helping her dad kind of cope with his decline to Alzheimer's disease by staging his death in a variety of different kinds of accidents, as well as what the afterlife might look like for him. I heard a really great interview with Kirsten Johnson on the podcast Switchblade Sisters, where she talked about Jackass. That was her chosen film to discuss with April Wolf on that show, in the context of Dick Johnson is Dead. And it's really fascinating to hear how those two movies overlap, and how she was sort of inspired by Johnny Knoxville and company to make this really poignant movie about mortality and family and love and death. It just is, it's extremely creative. It's extremely personal. And I think it displays really the whole of what it is like to be in the Johnson family, like what that dynamic is like. And it's a family that I think seems really happy and healthy and fun, and one that I would like to be part of. And was glad to be part of for the runtime of that film. So yeah, there are a lot of reasons why I like that movie so much, but it's my number one.
Will Ashton, why did you hate this film?
No, clearly I liked it a good bit, almost as much as Abby did, because for me, this was a great year for documentaries. I had at least 1 or 2 on my list, but I think this movie for me is some of the most empathetic and personal filmmaking we've seen this year, while also just being, like Abby said, very creative and unique in its presentation, while not having those creative influences and those stylistic styles undermine the emotional underpins of the film, which I just think are so complicated and nuanced, but presented in a way that feel very enriched and meaningful. And I know some people were, I guess, critical of the film because they found it to be, I guess, morbid or oblique in a certain way. And I could almost see that if it wasn't so clear that Kirsten Johnson is bringing so much warmth and heartfelt sincerity to not only the film's presentation, but her complicated relationship with her father and his slow passing. The movie itself, I can see this one maybe just being a little too, I guess, lack for a better word, like maybe out there for some audiences, just because it is tackling these very serious themes in a kind of like bubbly and unique kind of kooky way. But I think that's what really endeared me to the film, was that it was willing to take all these creative risks while also, like I said before, bring so much heart and humanity and realism to it. And I think it's a tremendous balancing act that really accomplishes so much, and easily became one of the most emotional movies of the year for me, particularly because I had a family experience not long before I saw this film that echoed a lot of the themes that were addressed in this film. So yeah, this was a pretty easy pick for my top 5, and I'm glad that Abby liked it so much as well.
All right, every year we have a like Cinemaholics movie of the year, and this is one that is really like celebrated and shared across all of our lists, at least in the honorable mentions. So films that have gotten this honor before include Brigsby Bear in our first year, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse after that, and then last year was Parasite. This year, I think it's pretty safe to say our movie of the year is Dick Johnson Is Dead. Since that is Abby's number 1, Will's number 3, it's in my honorable mentions. I think it makes perfect sense to pick that one. Although it would be really close. I think if one other person had put Bloody Nose in their top 10, that might have been the favorite here. But yeah, I Will, Abby, do either of you contest this movie of the year for Cinemaholics?
I'm not gonna. I think it's a really outstanding pick. It's my number 1. So
no, it's not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree with you. I was kind of surprised. I thought you were going to pick Nomadland, truth be told, because that was on all of our lists, but I'm happy to put Dick Johnson at this pick.
I think because Dick Johnson is the number 1, I think that,
okay.
And it seems like it really just, it did something to all three of us, Right. So.
Okay, yeah, for sure.
Well, that'll do it for our top 10 films of 2020. Thank you for listening, and thank you for listening this entire year. We're so excited for all of the films and conversations we are going to have in the year ahead, especially as 2020 represents the year that Abby officially joined us. So grateful to have you, Abby, especially
for sure.
With our top 10 episode. It's great to have you as a frequent voice now.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really fun to get to join you guys every week instead of just occasionally as a guest, and to talk through these movies. It's been really fun to experience the movies of 2020 with you.
Well, let's move on then, of course, to 2021. We'll be doing that, of course, next week. Plenty of films to talk about, and so keep your ears tuned to all of that. We'll skip plugs this week and do that. We'll save them for next week, since we've definitely had quite a long time here on the show, but hopefully you enjoyed it, every second of it. So we'll see you all next week from the Internet California. I am John Negroni.
From the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
From the Internet Kansas City, I'm Abby Olchesi.
See you next time.